I would like to invite up the two remaining female scholars up to the stage. We have Sheikha Muslima and Sheikha Alia, both of them having completed their studies at Al-Azhar University in Egypt. And Sheikha Muslima is someone that really, upon coming back to America, was someone that inspired many young women to start a path of learning. And she's involved in the majlis. And then we also have Sheikha Alia, again, another graduate of Al-Azhar University, and someone who teaches privately on the side. And one thing I really want to emphasize is her book, Bedtime Sunnahs for Children, which there will be a book signing available later on today. And really to highlight that when we have people that write books for our children, it's just as difficult as writing things that are very difficult and complicated. We want our children to be able to love Islam, to love the Quran, and to love the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So writing at a level that our kids can be happy and they believe is something that's very important. I will take my seat to start the panel discussion. Sheikh Abdul Nasser will be returning shortly. I would ask if any of you have any comments about any of the other speakers' talks, but I can almost guarantee no one will actually say anything, so I'll just skip over that formality. And one of the questions I do want to particularly ask our two female scholars that just came up is, after these 4 talks about prioritizing Islamic knowledge, making learning our religion, learning the Quran and learning the Hadith something central to build a functioning family, I want to particularly ask you two who went with your husbands to Al-Azhar to study and why you did that. What were some of the fruits that came out of that? What were the benefits that you see now and in the future in any aspect that you'd like to bring up?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. I don't want to take a whole lot of time answering this question, but I could actually stay here and talk for a very long time about the journey of studying together with my husband, alhamdulillah. One of the things that before we went to Egypt, we didn't know what it meant to quote unquote study Islam. We just knew we wanted to do it. It was like, we just want to study Islam. So we didn't know the different subjects, the different fields, the different specializations. We didn't even have the Arabic language down. We had to learn Arabic first. And even in the consideration process for marriage, we were very simple, I think, in the way that we thought about everything. But I remember us having a conversation about, well, if we ever disagree on how we should do something, what are we going to do to resolve it? And the answer was, we'll just do the Islamic thing. Whatever the Islamic answer is going to be, we'll just both follow that. And so that made sense, alhamdulillah. And then the benefit of actually going to study is we grew together, and we grew in our knowledge together, and we grew in understanding these different subjects and the nuances together. And if we ever did actually have a different way at looking at the same legal issue, both of us were in conversation with each other at the same level, I want to say, like understanding that debate within the larger debate in Islamic studies. And so the home kind of becomes a little bit, actually a place of learning, because you're married to someone that you can have these discussions with, and you can go back and forth and understand. And sometimes we may differ a little bit on something, but we each respect each other's position because we know it's been arrived to through the Islamic tradition and through valid scholarship. I think it's a huge blessing. We don't, alhamdulillah, as a family, we don't have a confusion, I want to say, around is this allowed or is that not allowed in Islam, or we speak the same language, we have the same narrative of where our understanding of Islam comes from, and that really just makes it so that there's a given space for shared understanding. Alhamdulillah, even like one of the questions that once came up when we were in Egypt was, someone said, what if the husband prays according to one madhab and the wife wants to pray according to a different madhab? Can she stand behind him in prayer? And of course she can stand behind him in prayer, but just some of those types of things would come up. But we actually knew couples in Egypt where the husband is studying Hanafi fiqh, that's his specialization, and his wife is going to do Maliki fiqh, and not to defy him in any way, but just this is generally accepted forms of practice within the deen, and giving each other that space within the space of shared knowledge is empowering to both parties. Wallahu alam.
Just adding on to what Sheikha Muslima said, we were one of those couples that were two different madhabs. So my husband studied Hanafi fiqh and I studied Shafi'i fiqh. But I grew up as a Hanafi. Honestly, I studied Shafi'i fiqh for fun, because I just kind of wanted to understand why people did things differently in the masjid. And it was great because what that led to was us learning about both madhahib at the same time. I would learn what I read in the Shafi'i fiqh books, and then I would ask my husband, like, oh, what does the Hanafi school say about this? And that created a larger discourse, and it actually widened our ilm because we got two madhabs for the price of one, essentially. And it's the same story as Sheikha Muslima and Sheikh Jamal. We went not knowing anything. We didn't even plan to do Islamic studies. We honestly just went for the purpose of studying the Arabic language. And to be 100% honest, once you taste the sweetness of studying, you just can't stop. It's almost as if it's an addiction. And I think everybody on this panel will agree with me on that, because you're in this environment where you're going to a school that's not in the best conditions, but what makes it so beautiful is that there are people there from all over the world striving to learn about the deen of Allah. Striving to build the relationship with Allah. And so you have that motivation to bounce off of, and then you just want to learn more. It's like, oh, what does this scholar say? Or what does that madhab say? Or what about this issue? Or what about that? And then it just leads to this amazing, beautiful relationship between the husband and the wife to just grow in that environment together. And when you have children, it's nice because the foundation of your marriage kind of becomes shrouded in the deen of Allah. Like everywhere in our house there's Islamic books. I mean, I have my daughter here and she's being watched by a friend of mine in the mommy room. I have like an Islamic book probably in her bag right now. I mean, you just take it with you everywhere you go. And there's books in the house. My son sometimes will pretend, I'm giving a talk at the masjid because that's where dad is out right now. And it's a beautiful thing, and that's something that I didn't have when I was growing up. And so if we're able to provide that environment for our children, whether you're able to go study overseas or not, just being on the same page with your husband is so vital, and it's so important to share that love and have that connection together, inshallah.
Moving on, kind of the next questions that we did have for the speakers is I wanted to now gear it towards both Sheikh Farhan and Sheikh Abdul Nasser. And one of the things I wanted to highlight, like I've mentioned over and over again, is you two have been teaching at seminaries for literally almost a decade now. Can you talk, you guys talked about the need to study, the crisis of knowledge. Can you go a little bit into maybe trends you've seen in students, maybe how it's changed from 5 years ago to maybe today? What are the students more interested in? What are the students lacking in? Or just any kind of ideas that you've seen overall in the trend of students in the path of teaching at Qalam and teaching at IOK?
So when it comes to maybe some of the lessons that I've learned in trying to serve the cause of Islamic education, and again, just for the sake of thoroughness, I know pretty much everyone during their talks touched on this idea, that by no means do I want to give the idea that there is only one particular format through which the religion can be learned, and that is in a full-time enrolled kind of setting that many of us benefited from a lot. But that there are different formats that can be adopted as long as somebody's continuing to learn. But when it does come to that particular kind of structure of learning, where there is a more long-term, more full-time investment of studying the deen and the religion, some of the observations, or rather even lessons that I've learned, are that first and foremost, the circumstances and the culture within which we are, and maybe the circumstances and the culture that is present where we went to go study and where we went to go learn, are very, very different. And that's why I think particularly, especially, Sheikh Mudassir and Sheikh Aisha, who we heard from today, Dr. Tasneem, I think these folks are going to bring a really interesting perspective, and I think they'll be able to more effectively fulfill one of the necessities or one of the realities for a lot of students of knowledge in our kind of context and culture. The big thing that I realized was overseas, a lot of times, the students are typically younger. There are no other obligations or responsibilities that they have while they're studying. I mean, we can all probably think of that one classmate we had who was older and had kids, but exactly, there's like one person that everybody talks about. There was this one guy, and he had a kid. And in reality, probably a quarter of the students we have at the Qalam campus, like 140 students, maybe even more, about a third of those students probably have children. And they have other responsibilities. And I mean, we only take students after they've graduated from high school. And 70% of our students actually have completed an undergraduate education and something else before they come to us. So there's a lot of different realities at play here. So a few things I learned that had to, develop or change. We had to learn to adjust to. First of all, maybe there was a little bit less effort required on our part when it came to just like very, very basic tarbiyah. Like we didn't have to tell them to iron their clothes, hopefully. All right? We didn't have to tell them to cut their nails, and we didn't have to tell them to, wear your shoes. Why are you walking around barefoot? Right? Whereas when you have younger students, sometimes those are certain realities, right? But we then needed to put more work into being more accommodating, understanding, and even flexible. I was just talking to a friend about this, that it is not uncommon at all for there to be kids running around back and forth down the hall at the Qalam campus. You might come into my office looking for me and you'll find my kid sitting there drawing. It's not uncommon. So we had to learn a lot of that. We had to adapt to a lot of that institutionally and learn to understand that and respect that. That we're not talking about 15-year-olds who literally have nothing else to do in their life. But rather we're talking about a 25-year-old who had to take his father to a doctor's appointment, who had to call in to work because they needed him. He works remotely or whatever it is, but he had to be on a conference call or whatever the case may be. We had to start to realize those types of things. And then the third thing personally that I learned a lot, and I try to impart that to my faculty and staff, and that is we also had to put a lot more effort and time and understanding into the idea that these are older, more mature, sophisticated people with more lived experience in the world, and they might have some very difficult and tough questions. They might have contrasting or contradictory ideas, and that does not make them the enemy. That does not make them a problem. It just means you got to do your homework before you come to class. So these are some of the lessons that I felt like I learned.
I guess just to kind of build off what Sheikh Abdul Nasser mentioned, first and foremost, you make me feel old by mentioning that. I guess I know where all my gray hair comes from now. Generally speaking, I guess, we've been having this discussion with some of our faculty members for the past couple of months, is that we noticed that the whole trend of people actually going overseas to study is slowly coming to an end. I mean, we had a really difficult time coming up with even a handful of people that we know that essentially sacrificed everything and went overseas to go and study. And it's just that it's not practical anymore. And the socio-political reality of the world really doesn't allow for it as well. And a lot of parents don't see the value in it, and sometimes students may not see the value in it. So having these institutions here is really, really important. And there are these celebrated institutions that we have throughout the world, like the Darul Ulooms and the Azhars and the Medina universities. I feel that we should have that same caliber of education here in America, where our students don't have to actually sacrifice everything and go abroad and study. And we have the resources here, alhamdulillah, to do that. Having said that, our student body is very different, right? Culturally speaking, it's very, very different. If you go to a madrasa like we did, everybody in the madrasa is kind of like on the same program, where everyone's like the same clean-cut, image and mindset and ideology, and they're kind of just following what the teacher is saying, and they're going along with the curriculum. Whereas here, all of our students are very, very diverse. They're coming from different backgrounds, different families, they're involved in different things. So it builds a really rich environment in the classroom, where you have all of these students from different backgrounds giving their perspective and giving their experiences and learning with us. It's very unique. And the vast majority of our students that we have here, they're here by choice. It's not something that their parents are forcing them to do. This is something that they're doing on their own volition. It's their own intention. It's their own motivation, which is something that might be very different than overseas, where a lot of the students in the madaris or even in the Islamic universities, they're not necessarily there by choice. They're there by circumstance. Even though you might have the exceptions, you have amazing students there as well, but a lot of our students here are here by choice. And because of that, they're more motivated to study. But the other challenge is there's a lot more distractions, right? Especially with the advent of technology and social media. We find that a lot of our students might have some focus problems because there's too many distractions, which is something that we have to learn how to deal with, because that's just part and parcel of the reality that we live in. So having these institutions here is really important, and the fact that our students are not only studying Islam on a full-time basis and they're engaged with the teachers, but the fact that they're also engaged in society, where they're not cut off, they're not just in the four circles of the school, but they're actually attending university outside or college outside, or they're working, or they have a family, whatever it may be. That is something that's also very, very promising and very different. So there's a lot of room for improvement, there's a lot of room for growth, but alhamdulillah, I think there's a lot of positive growth going on, which makes me feel very hopeful for our future generations and our students to come, that inshallah we'll take what we're doing and excel in it, and they'll make it much better and carry on this legacy into the future.
Jazakumullahu khairan to all of our speakers for their wonderful speeches and for the hopefully fruitful, somewhat quote-unquote discussion or Q&A session. If we can start wrapping up to the next portion of the program, I'll have all the speakers kindly come off the stage so we can move on, inshallah. Okay.